Nuts are a nutritious and tasty snack, but are you storing them wrong? Let's unlock the secrets of extending the shelf life of our favorite nuts. You know, nuts are expensive, but they offer many health benefits and I think they're really tasty. So if you're like me, you hate to see any of them go to waste. So I believe it's important to maximize that shelf life of your nuts and to keep them fresh for as long as we can. In a nutshell, I'm sorry, I just couldn't resist. Nuts are good for you even though they're very, very high in fat. But they're low in carbs and a great source of several nutrients, including vitamin E, magnesium, and selenium. And more importantly, research has found that frequently eating nuts lowers the inflammation related to heart disease and diabetes. Now, all nuts don't have the same percentage of fat. Macadamia nuts, they've got the most, while pistachio, much lower fat content. So I think we're convinced nuts are good for us, but how do we keep them fresh? Well, when you buy a package of nuts, somewhere on that package is a date. And this one says, best if used by. So you want to check out that date when you're buying it because you don't want to have something near the expiration date when you buy it because then not going to keep as long. Now, what does that date really mean? It means it might start losing quality and some nutrition after that date. But these dates are only an approximation. Much depends on how you store your nuts and at what temperature they're stored. Now, it doesn't mean that your nuts should be thrown in the trash once this date is reached. However, the lifespan of these nuts can be greatly enhanced by following the methods mentioned later in this video. Oh, and I should mention one other thing. If you're buying nuts in bulk, a big bin, you don't have a best by date necessarily. You don't know when those nuts were put in the bin. So make sure you buy them from a store that has a lot of turnover in their nuts. Ever get ready to add some nuts to your favorite recipe and find out they've went rancid? Yeah, it's very distasteful and it can ruin your recipe. So why do nuts go rancid? Now remember, when I said nuts are very high in oil, well, it's that same oil that has the health benefits that also is going to cause your nuts to go rancid. So how do you know if your nuts are rancid? Well, one way is to smell them. If they smell kind of like paint slightly, that's a sign they went rancid. Also the texture, okay, is cracked nicely, so it should be fine. And if you took a bite, if it loses its crunch, it's starting to go bad. And the appearance may darken, and we already went through the taste. It is a bitter taste. Now, all nuts aren't the same. Shelf life differs depending on the variety of nut and the format of the nut. Is it unshelled or is it shelled? Is it in halves or is it in pieces? All of that matters for shelf life. So nuts in a shell can be held twice as long as nuts out of a shell. And nuts out of a shell that are in half can be held twice as long as nuts in pieces. So it's just something to remember when you buy your nuts. So now, different types of nuts keep longer than others. And it still depends on how you keep them. Almonds have the longest lifespan and the shortest lifespan is pine nuts. I mean, they go rancid pretty quick. Now, if you're like me during the holiday season, you might see a great buy 2 pounds of nuts at Sam's Club. So you snap it up. But then when you're making your recipe, you only need a cup. So what do you do with the rest of the nuts? First, I'm going to point out the storage methods I don't recommend. You may be lucky enough, fortunate enough to have your own home freeze dryer. So you think, I'm just going to freeze dry these nuts. Not a good idea. Because of the high oil content in the nuts, freeze drying will not help extend the lifespan of the nuts. So you might be wondering, can you can your nuts to increase their lifespan? Well, that used to be an accepted practice, but the National Center for Home Food Preservation no longer says do it. It's a no-no. And the reason is this: they may be exposed to a very small degree of moisture during the process. And recent research has shown that salmonella can survive even in low moisture. And you know what? Lately, if you've been watching the news, they've been finding salmonella on everything from cantaloupe to dry dog food. So be safe. Don't can your nuts. So an important thing to know is there really is no consensus for shelf life for a nut. One site might have a shorter period and another site might have a longer shelf life for the same variety of nut. Hi, I'm Prepper Potpourri, and I hope you hit the subscribe and the notification button and join me in my journey to find the best methods for food preservation, for food storage, for building your food storage bank, great home canning recipes, and how to keep your family safe in an emergency. And if you find value in this video, I appreciate it if you hit that like button too. Thank you. Okay, you've been waiting through this entire video. What is the best way to store your nuts? Well, kind of depends. How long do you want to store your nuts? I mean, if you're rotating through them every 3 to 4 months, just leave them on the package on your pantry shelf. They will be fine. Now, if you want to store them on your pantry shelf for a longer period, I suggest using a glass jar, or you can use a plastic container. And you may want to do this. You may want to sterilize your jar first, make sure it's nice and clean and dry. Then put on your canning lid. And then you can use your vacuum sealer with attachment, or I like this handheld. There we go, just put it on. It really works nice. I do have a link down below if you're interested. It's so easy to use and it's very small, so it doesn't take up a lot of space. So right now, it's usually at about 30 that it starts to kind of change in tone. So let's see if we've got it. Okay, we just want to. Okay, see, I can lift it right up, nicely vacuum sealed. And this is a largemouth jar, but all you have to do, it has this part that it's attached to it, and it just goes on like this, and then you lock it, and then you can use small mouth lids too. And this is the size of it. Really doesn't take up much space at all. Really like having this as one of my pantry tools. Or you can add an oxygen absorber before sealing your jar. And that should prolong the shelf life right on your pantry shelves. That oxygen absorber will help reduce oxidation, which helps slow rancidity. But I advise keeping your containers out of heat and light. Now, if you want a longer method to store your nuts, other than storing in your pantry, I suggest store them in your refrigerator. You can extend shelf life by 50 to 100%. I mean, just look at this table. As you can see, Most nuts will last up to a year if refrigerated, and pecans can last 18 months before going bad. Now, experiments do indicate there is a slight loss of quality of the nuts when you store in the refrigerator. But if you want to extend it even longer, the ultimate nut storage method, and not lose any quality in your nuts, then deep freeze them. That's right, put them in your freezer. Now, I just put them in this the bag they came in. But you could also vacuum pack them, vacuum seal in a bag, or put them in a glass jar and put them in your freezer, whatever you have on hand. But I find this works just well. In the freezer, most nuts will last up to 2 years past the expiration date. Now, let's look at this one. The expiration date is best if used by February 1st, 2022. Okay? And right now, well, we're only 3 months away from February 1st, 2024. So let's taste one. Good. A little cold. Delicious. It really, really works. The other good thing is nuts are relatively low in moisture, less than 4%. So you can freeze them again and again. Take them out, take out what you need, throw them back in the freezer. And I have done that multiple times. Really, usually just snacking on these nuts because they are so delicious. So how do I store my nuts? Well, I use a combination. Something like this package, it's going to be on my pantry shelf because I bought it specifically to use for a recipe. I'm going to be making my mom's recipe for refrigerated cookies for the holidays, and this will go into the cookies. Well, the pecans will, but I might also from walnuts. And let me talk a little bit about that. These are walnuts that I hand gathered, and these are over 2 years old. They were 2 years old probably in about October. I keep them like this, and you should have a mesh bag, which I don't have, but this is more of a produce bag that has holes all in the bottom so it gets air. Keep them in a cooler spot, and they will keep way beyond 2 years. Let's cut one open and do a taste test. Okay. So here is the delicious black walnut pieces. It's a flavor much different than English walnuts. I love it, especially in cookies. You can keep these a long time without worrying about refrigeration or freezing. So I urge you, get out and forage in the fall and find some black walnuts. Now, I don't use my refrigerator. I just don't have the room for that. But I do have plenty of freezer room. So when I have big bags of nuts, they go directly in the freezer. And I don't do anything special with them. Just reseal the bag, throw them in the freezer. So that's how I store my nuts, but you have to decide what is the best storage method for your circumstances. And it's going to depend. How often do you use the nuts? I mean, if you're using them all in 4 months or less, your pantry is just fine. And also, what form are the nuts? Are they in the shell or unshelled? And if they're unshelled, are they half pieces or little tiny pieces? And what available space do you have in your pantry, your refrigerator, or your freezer? Hope you found this helpful. And if you want to learn the best way, I mean the absolutely best way to store beans, rice, pasta, and salt long-term, watch this playlist.